My name is Anna Griffin. I am a fellow here at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism, and it's a distinct pleasure today to moderate this conversation with Paul Harding. Paul is an author, a teacher, a rock star. He grew up on the North Shore, graduated from UMass, has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and according to the internet, which is never wrong, is a first cousin of figure skater Tanya Harding.
Start off with a joke. No, that's not true.
That is not true.
That's not true. But wouldn't that be a great?
It seemed a little. You're more handsome.
Thank you. I don't know if that's a backhand.
Anyway, he has redeemed the Harding name twice. First as a drummer with the 1990s group Coldwater Flat, which if you went to college in the 90s, as a few of us in the room did, you probably heard played quite a bit on campus radio. And then as the author of a little Cinderella story of a book, Tinkers, which is a kind of a tone poem almost about life in New England that sat in a drawer for 3 years, was bought by a boutique publisher affiliated with NYU Med School, had a first run of 3,500 copies, and then won the Pulitzer Prize, which is the way it works for everybody, right?
Yeah.
He is now finishing up work on his second novel, which shockingly will not sit in a drawer for any length of time, and will be published next spring by Random House. Paul is going to read a few things, and then we're going to talk about writing, and then we're going to throw it open to the room for questions. So, Paul Harding.
Great. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I figured what I do is, I've read from Tinkers about 7 million thousand times by now, but I figured I figured I'd read a little bit from Tinkers, and then give you a little bit from the novel that's going to be coming out next spring, and then just a little 2-page self-contained piece. So it's going to be kind of buffet today, and then I'll be delighted to have a conversation. It'll be fun. So Tinkers, for those of you who haven't looked at it, is about a guy who's a sort of a peddler. He's the tinker of the title, and he abandons his family. Tinkers is set in northern Maine in the 20s. And the protagonist abandons his family when he finds out that his wife is going to have him committed to an asylum because he has epilepsy, and his epilepsy is so disruptive to the family that the best thing that she can think of to do is to have him committed. So he flees the family. So this is just a brief passage after a couple of days after he's had a grand mal seizure. The mornings began in the dark. They began with setting the home in order for the day, so that it might already be industrious when the sun climbed first the invisible horizon and then the branches of the dark trees. Fill the stove box with wood, fill the milk pail with milk. How that pail, clanking against George's leg as he crosses the yard, splits the seamless night, wakes the other children who sniffle and yawn and root deeper into their warm beds, dreading the cold air and morning chores. Mother will find Marjorie sitting up in bed and wheezing. Darla will open her eyes and say, the sun's late. I'm sure it was up earlier yesterday. Mummy, something's wrong. Joe will be found with a foot in the wrong leg of his overalls, grinning and asking for pancakes and maple syrup, his favorite meal. Fetch the water, make a fire. Your cold mornings are filled with the heartache about the fact that although we are not at ease in this world, it is all we have, that it is ours, but it is full of strife, so that all we can call our own is strife. But even that is better than nothing at all, isn't it? And as you split frost-laced wood with numb hands, rejoice that your uncertainty is God's will and his grace toward you, and that is beautiful and part of a greater certainty, as your own father always said in his sermons and to you at home. And as the axe bites into the wood, be comforted in the fact that the ache in your heart and the confusion in your soul means that you are still alive, still human, and still open to the beauty of the world, even though you have done nothing to deserve it. And when you resent the ache in your heart, remember you will be dead and buried soon enough. Howard resented the ache in his heart. He resented that it was there every morning when he woke up, that it remained at least until he had dressed and had some hot coffee, if not until he had taken stock of the goods in his brush cart and fed and hitched Prince Edward, that's his mule, if not until his rounds were done, if not until he fell asleep that night, and if his dreams were not tormented by it. He resented equally the ache and the resentment itself. He resented his resentment because it was a sign of his own limitations of spirit and humility, no matter that he understood that such was each man's burden. He resented the ache because it was uninvited, seemed imposed, a sentence, and despite the encouragement he gave himself each morning, it baffled him because it was there whether the day was good or bad, whether he witnessed major kindness or minor transgression, suffered sourceless grief or spontaneous joy. This morning, the Monday morning after the Friday morning, when there was a pre-dawn snow and Howard had stopped to look at a field that had once been a homestead and had in a fugue state made a contraption out of twigs and grass and flowers, which he had already forgotten making, and then had had a seizure and awoke freezing in the field and had finally realized who he was and where he was and had made his way home, this morning brought fear that there hid somewhere on one of the back roads that he intended to canvass another seizure, a bolt of lightning coiled behind a rock or stump or within the hollow of a tree or some strange nest, and which his passing would trigger to spring, to explode, and to impale him. Such vanity! What gall to elect for yourself such attention, good or bad. Project yourself above yourself. Look at the top of your dusty hat, cheap felt, wilted and patched with scraps from the last wilted and patched felt hat. What a crown! What a king you are to deserve such displeasure. How important that God stop whatever it is he is tending and pitch bolts at your head. Rise higher, above the trees. Your crown is already hard to see amid the dust of the road and the dirt of the ditch. But you are still remarkable. Rise higher, perhaps to the height where the blackbirds flap. Where have you gone? Oh, there you are, I think. That is you, isn't it? That wisp inching along. Well, rise higher then, to the belly of the clouds. Where have you gone? Now higher, to where, if you are not careful, you might stub your toe on the mountains of the moon. Where are you? Never mind you. Where is your home, your county, your state, your nation? Ah, there it is. And higher now, so that your hair and the lashes of your eyes catch fire from the sparks of solar flares. On which of those bright bodies do you rule your kingdom of dirt, your cart of soap? Very well, that one. I hope you are right. There is little need for a tinker on Mars. Now higher again, past the 8th planet, named for the king of the sea, and higher again, past the shadowy 9th, which for now only exists in the dreams of men back on, well, where have you gone? Which among those millions of glittering facets is where you belong? Where is it you toil and drum and fall to the ground and thrash in the weeds? A little light reading there for you. No. It only gets worse, I'm afraid. This is this next book that I'm just about to start line editing it with my editor at Random House. So I'm in this sort of frazzled monomaniacal kind of state where all I'm thinking of is this character in this new book. It's called Enon. It's set in the same world that Tinkers occurs in. It's about one of the grandsons of the protagonist George Crosby in Tinkers. It's not a sequel, properly speaking, but it's going to make Tinkers look like an episode of the Three Stooges, I'm afraid. So it's about Charlie Crosby and his daughter Kate. And Charlie loses Kate at the beginning of the novel, and it's about how he unravels basically after her passing. And so Enon is the name of the village where this family lives. So I think this should be self-explanatory. This is just him thinking about how his daughter Kate is now one of the citizens of the dead of Enon. I think the only thing you all know, here we are in Cambridge, you all know who Sarah Good is, right? She was the witch who was hanged up in Salem. I think that's all you need to know. So, the ground of Enon is full of the bones of animals and citizens, sheep and dogs, fathers and brothers, oxen and horses, mothers and aunts, pigs and chickens, sons and daughters, anonymous cats and owls, Puritans and Indians, and unnamed infants are all in the ground, getting their bones mixed up in the currents of soil and groundwater, migrating beneath the foundations of our houses and the fairways of the golf courses, trading ribs and teeth and shins and knuckles, commuting under baseball diamonds in the beds of streams, snagging up on roots and rocks, shelves of granite and seams of clay. There are certainly more citizens of Enon beneath its 5,400 acres than there are above it. Just beneath our feet, on the other side of the surface of the earth, there is another subterranean Enon, which conceals its secret business by conducting it too slowly for its purposes to be observed by the living. Imagine all the dead of Enon. Imagine all the dead who lived on this land, who roamed and returned, who remained and who fled, only to be fetched back by their well-meaning kith. Imagine those who rejoiced, those who despaired, and those who never gave a thought to their portion on this mild acre. Imagine the woman who'd have been called a maiden, slapping her knee and wiping tears from her eyes, laughing, forehead to forehead, with the man who'd have been called a painted savage, crying, defilement wasn't even the word, and he hooting with glee and gasping back, genocide doesn't even cover the half of it. Imagine Sarah Good and her prosecutors dancing hand in a circle. She sings, "I hope you drank your blood, good sirs." She famously said to her accusers, "God will make you drink blood." "I hope you drank your blood, good sirs." And they refrain in 4-part harmony, "We hope your collar's just right, dear miss." And imagine the hosts of the dead, these Caucasians, these Algonquins, these Puritans and renegades, these farmer princes and vagabond kings. Oh, I just realized I don't like that line, and it's because it sounds like John Irving. Sorry. There's a writer at work for you. How's that? Getting your money worth. And imagine the hosts of the dead, what I'll have to do for now. And imagine the hosts of the dead, these Caucasians, these Algonquins, these Puritans and renegades, these farmer princes and vagabond kings, you princes of Maine, right? That's Irving. The deserving poor and the undeserving rich, these couple dozen kidnapped Africans, this wretched solitary son of Cathay, and this other primordial rank and file of souls for whom we on this side of the partition have no names to print in books because they were ancient rumors to men ancient to us. Imagine all these souls easefully mingling with one another, and watch this dead Congress, this unicameral Senate of sleepers, waiting out the days, the one day, the one long day, regaling one another with feats of murder and rape, with accounts of flayings and immolations that would make even the sturdiest of the living fainty and pale. Surely theirs were accounts of grace and kindness too, of mercies and mildnesses. But perhaps in their much changed state, such benevolences are no longer so rare, are the rule in fact, and so the yarns preferred in the graveyard are those that recall with relief and mirth the wicked misadventures of the burning human heart. These dead all were children of the first same violence, all troubled siblings sired by a detonation, and they have now found their ease in the great democracy of death. Not long after her death, I began to imagine that Kate was a citizen of that village of ghosts. It was not hard for me to picture Kate living in an Enon that existed in the past, where all the citizens from all the village's history lived among one another. I could see her, newly arrived, walking down Main Street between the cemetery and town hall, the Memorial Day parade route, I guessed. I saw her as having come from the beach a mile away, not from the sunbathing she'd done with Carrie right before she died, but from a landing, a disembarkation after a trip across another Atlantic. Kate has dried in the breeze, but her skin is salted and her hair and clothes brined. She is pale and still wobbly on her feet from the weeks of the rise and fall of the trip across the oceans, and still feels nauseous from the seasickness she suffered most of the way. The details of the shore and the dark boat that brought her are imprecise, beyond the boundaries of this other Enon. I knew that the boat turned back after its crew saw Kate safely ashore, and that by the time she entered the village, it had sailed beneath the horizon to fetch more pilgrims. Main Street is unpaved and called the Turnpike. A dog, a terrier, trots out onto the road from the high corn that grows in a field belonging to the farm opposite the cemetery. It approaches Kate and barks and grins. Kate crouches down and says, "Hi, boy," to the dog and scratches it behind the ear. The dog is small, a descendant of the first terriers the villagers must have kept in order to help control rats. Kate takes a corner of hard yellow cornbread from her rolled-up beach towel and offers it to the dog. The bread must be old and stale and soaked in salt, the last of Kate's rations from the crossing. The dog sniffs at the bread, looks up at Kate, yawns, shakes itself, and trots off toward a low, brown house with a high roof and small windows fitted with diamond-shaped panes of leaded glass. The house stands alone, behind a stone wall running along the road. Kate walks toward the house. The front door of the house is closed, and when Kate gets to it and knocks, no one answers. She walks around to the back of the house. There is a dirt yard, a small garden in which some kitchen herbs grow. Kate does not recognize any of the herbs. They are dotted with black and midnight purple flowers and have prickly, hairy leaves the color of bats' wings. There's a pile of wood stacked against the back wall. Kate turns away from the house and looks up the hill, which appears as if it is used for pasturage. It is late afternoon and the shadows are long. A quartet of goats are making their way across the summit of the hill, slowly and in single file, and their thin shadows stretch in oblique angles ahead of them, in parallel lines down the length of the hill, as if they are puppets being marched along the crest of a stage at the ends of long black sticks. Halfway up the hill, there is a girl, perhaps 2 or 3 years older than Kate, sitting on a stump with her elbows on her knees, one hand curled into a fist on which she rests her chin, the other hand extended and opened, palm up, in which a small yellow bird is perched, eating thistle. She wears a black dress that Kate finds archaic and beautiful, and black leather shoes with wooden heels. Kate knows the girl from all the town history I've told her over the years, stories which bored her in themselves, but which she loved to hear because she loved that I loved them, and that I loved telling them to her. Despite the girl's infamous role in local history, Kate was loyal to her from the first time I told her the girl's story, and always remained so, convinced that theories about her hysteria and madness were the kind of humbuggery that always suppresses the spirits of strong young girls. Kate knows that the girl has seen her, or at least is aware that she is there, even though the girl has not moved. Kate knows, too, that the girl does not move or gesture toward her because she already knows that Kate will approach her. Kate walks across the yard and into the pasture and up the hill and stands in front of the girl, who looks up, squinting in the light of the late, low orange sun. There is a cooling, gusty breeze that makes the flowers and the long, stiff grass shiver. The pasture smells like grass and open earth and faintly dung. Kate says to the girl, "You are Sarah." The girl raises the little yellow bird in her hand to her lips and whispers a syllable to it. The bird nods and flies away behind the hill toward the setting sun. The girl says to Kate, "And you are Kate." Kate suddenly understands that she and young Sarah Good are together in a suspended moment, a small eddy or niche set aside, but within all the compounded times of Enon, which are always confluent and permeate. Sarah stares at Kate in a manner that is patient and deeply familiar, and which frightens Kate. Kate begins to cry, and Sarah reaches out and takes one of her hands in both of her own. Sarah strokes Kate's hand as Kate sobs, but her expression does not change, and even her hands stroke Kate's in a perfunctory way, as if she is comforting someone else. And it feels to Kate like Sarah is looking into someone else's eyes, not hers, and that terrifies Kate all the more. Kate startles and tries to draw her hand out of Sarah's grasp. Sarah does not let go. Kate sobs to her, "Sarah, let me go." Sarah says, "It's all right, my dear friend. Everything is all right." But again, it feels to Kate as if Sarah Good is speaking to someone else, just beyond her, maybe just behind her, or just to the side. She cannot tell where, but just outside of her awareness. Then Kate catches a glimpse of to whom it is she feels like Sarah is talking. It is Kate. There is a comforting, rushing sensation, similar to what it feels like to regain consciousness after nearly drowning or having had the wind knocked out of oneself and passed out. Kate gasps, and there is a flooding of herself back into herself, and she looks back at Sarah, who smiles at her and now clearly is looking right at her, now clearly always was looking right at her all along, and who is once again Kate's dear, cherished old friend, born, grown, beloved, accused, condemned, and hanged. And Kate is once again herself, also born, also grown, also beloved, struck down and killed 3 centuries on, tomorrow, just this moment, centuries ago, on the very road laid out below them. Kate kneels down in front of Sarah, who is still sitting on the tree stump, and rests her head in her friend's lap. Sarah runs her fingers through Kate's hair and says to her, not much louder than a whisper, "Sometimes it's hard to remember." Kate feels a tug at the cuff of her jeans. She raises her head from Sarah's lap and meets the impassive stare of one of the goats, which has wandered down from the summit of the hill and begun chewing on the cuff of her pants. So there's a little bit of Enon.
Do we get royalties for being part of the editing process?
Yeah, well, I'll take constructive criticism during the conversation. And this is just take a couple of minutes to read. This is just a brief piece that I wrote, and I guess I think it's recognizable, but it's set in Nigeria, and this is something I wrote a while ago, and kind of threw in a drawer, and it's this sort of thing seems to keep coming up. So it's called Speed of Light. We lived in the Delta. The fingers of the Delta reached into the ocean. Oil lay beneath the Delta, beneath the water deep in the earth. A network of pipes crisscrossed the Delta. The pipes were large enough for a man to walk upright inside them. People lived inside abandoned sections of pipe in remote areas. We called them pipers. Sometimes we took turns climbing on one another's shoulders in order to put our ears to the pipes to hear the flowing oil, even though it didn't really seem to work. At night, lights on the pipes glowed over the water and the land. At night, people sabotaged the pipes and stole the oil. Then we went to the lakes of oil left by the thieves and scooped the oil up with cans and buckets and bedpans. We did this before the army arrived. Every time we collected the oil, someone, somewhere, somehow made a spark, and the Delta erupted in fire and was scorched bare, and our mothers and brothers and cousins perished again and again. Someone, somewhere, has made a spark. We all knew it would happen. We all hoped we would be in the village when it happened. I was not in the village. I was here, scooping oil, and now someone has made a spark, and I am in the middle of a pillar of fire. This is what the fire is like. It is a swaddling of light. I am crouched on my heels, and the bedpan I use to collect the oil is in my 2 hands. It is angled downward. I am in the middle of putting it into the oil, which is now not oil, but fire. The fire is swirling around my thighs and my arms. It is a crown around my head. It is a mantle over my shoulders. I cannot feel the fire. Perhaps I will never feel it. Perhaps it will consume me before my nerves send their signals of burning to my brain. One night, my friend Christopher and I went out to spend the little money we had on beer. He was just back from the university, living with his mother again. His sisters had taken jobs in Europe to help pay for his classes, but no one had heard from them since they had left, and no money had come either, so now he was back. He had wanted to study astronomy. When the bar closed, Christopher and I lurched arm in arm out into the street, laughing and singing angrily. The night sky was uncommonly clear and full of stars. Christopher said, "Jonathan, my friend, consider the stars in the age of their light." In my drunkenness, I missed Christopher's tone and sang, "The age of their light, the age of their light." "No, no," he said, "look." But first I looked at him. His face was turned toward the sky. His eyes moved across the stars as if he were reading a book or a musical score. He pointed. "Jonathan, do you see those 3 stars? The ones that make a triangle right there?" "Yes, my friend, I see them, I think," I said. I didn't see the triangle, but I didn't think it was important for what Christopher wanted to tell me. "Fine," he said. "The light you are seeing now from the star at the top of the triangle was made the year you were born. The light from the star on the bottom left was made when the Portuguese first sailed into the Delta. The light from the star on the bottom right was made 1,000 years before any of us saw a European. Our own history is in the sky, preserved for us in light. When you wake up tomorrow with your head pounding and your stomach flopping like a fish suffocating in the bottom of a boat, the light from the fires of the sun that sizzles your bloodshot eyes will have been made 8 minutes before you awoke to your hangover. For all you will know, the sun will have gone out and the light you curse 7 minutes and 59 seconds from the past. I am thinking of Christopher now, wrapped in my chrysalis of fire, taken up and held in this instant before my dispersal into ash. I wish I could ask him, Christopher, what is the light I see now? What is preserved in the light of this, the briefest of stars? Thank you, Sandra. Uplifting stuff for you.
Tinkers, tell me if I get the details wrong, but Tinkers began as a family story. It's biographical, and then became a short story that was part of your grad school application.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then was turned into a novel. Talk about the writing process to take something that's kind of family lore, turn it into a short story, and then what was the short story, and how did you expand that into a novel?
Well, the short story, I mean, first of all, it is the basic premises of Tinkers are all based on family stories that my maternal grandfather told me and my cousins, my brother, and I about his life growing up in northern Maine. But I wasn't interested in family history, and I wasn't interested in autobiography. Actually, it would be difficult for me to be less interested in autobiography. I'm not interested in myself. I'm interested in the fact that I am a self. So I just started writing about these kind of family legends, and the original short story version of Tinkers was 15 or 16 pages long, and it had actually what, if you look at the novel, is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the novel. The whole story was there, but it was so. If you've looked at Tinkers is pretty elliptical and nonlinear as it is, so you can imagine 15 pages. It was impossibly dense, impossibly elliptical and obscure. So enough people sort of gave me encouragement to expand it, so that after I left the Iowa Writers Workshop, I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, which was just a 7-month fellowship to work on the book. And so I spent 7 months toiling at toiling and worrying that I was making a perfectly decent short story into a terrible novel. And so it was just a matter of just expanding what was originally there, so that the kernel was there, but just keep building it up and building it up.
So the original short story was George Howard and George. It was both.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the whole thing was there, sort of in a very sort of
was it tiny
abbreviated.
font? How did you get that in 16 pages?
I don't know. It's just a strange. It's just. I write. The way that I write in such a haphazard manner, and it's totally intuitive and fortuitous. It's improvisational. It is. It's sort of circumstantial in a way, but the fact that I was a drummer, I write the way that I used to drum. I think of myself as an amanuensis. I take dictation, so if I'm playing drums, I just start to just do whatever comes over the wire. Same with writing, and so it's just I just kind of bop around the story, and very quickly, and I guess in some ways I was sort of impatient. I wanted to know what the end of the story was. And to be able to move around back and forth within the boundaries of it.
You don't outline.
You
don't outline.
No. Oh, no, I don't outline. It's
What
harrowing.
I read again on the internet, which we know, Tanya Harding, is sort of scenes of you with index cards and napkins and then you finally just
catastrophe, just absolute panic the whole time.
You're kind of a crazy man, aren't you? And then you just taped them together, stapled them together?
Yeah, with Tinkers, I actually literally did that. It's funny because I just finished the first draft of Enon, and I booked a couple of weeks at the Fine Arts Work Center, and so I went back down to Provincetown, and I damned if I didn't end up on the floor again with the whole novel, just like, is this gonna work? Is it gonna come together? And I think it did again, but who knows? It's such a strange thing. It turns out it's just, these are the kind of, the point of being a fiction writer anyways is not efficiency. It's like I have to go through these incredible difficulties in order to fully realize the book, or at least for these first two. I hope that I'll get better at it. But it doesn't seem to be a matter of getting better at it. It seems to be just this integral part of the process.
When you're writing that way, how do you guard against getting so far into the story and looking up and going, oh, I'm trying so many different things, I'm losing my reader? Is that just trust?
I never ever think about a reader, ever, and it's funny. I mean, it's no. It's because the deepest on the deepest level, it's the deepest way to be solicitous of a reader. You just trust yourself that you're writing something that you'd like to read. The problem with, I mean, this is not true for necessarily for journalism or for more genre-based fiction, but for the type of stuff. The worst thing you can do is try to write a novel in anticipation of people, first of all, who won't like it. Don't ever write your fiction for people who won't write. Just give yourself wholeheartedly to it and just trust that the reader will like what you like. Because otherwise, then you don't end up writing this. You don't pay attention to the story. You pay attention to these voices behind your shoulder who are saying, "Oh, well, she wasn't. She didn't have blue eyes in the first chapter. The copy editor will get that. That sort of thing." And you do. I mean, it really is. It's improvisational. So you do. You just give yourself over wholeheartedly to the story. And there are with Tinkers. Tinkers was only it's 192 pages. It's like 40,000 words. I cut 25,000 words out of Tinkers. I cut like a quarter of it.
What did you cut?
There's if you've looked at the book, there's the mother in the family, the mother of the family who's going to have her husband sent away. There's a whole section of the book that was just all about her life before she was married, and I just couldn't get it to work.
How do you feel now about that?
Sad. I feel very loyal to her.
Because one of the things that strikes me about the book is she is not an overwhelmingly sympathetic character.
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of these things that, I mean, this is another reason why you don't think about the reader, as it were, because the reader that you imagine is usually can't. You don't know who's going to look at your book, and you don't. You have to trust your subjects, you have to trust your characters, and let them elaborate themselves who they really are. Because a lot of the stuff that I wrote for this woman Kathleen that ended up on the cutting room floor was trying to make her a sympathetic character, quote unquote. But for one thing, if you ever met the woman upon whom she was based, you'd think she was an angel. I mean, the woman she was based on was much worse than she. And I had this strange experience I was in Cape Town for a book festival, and was talking with some South African writer and a writer from Zimbabwe, and Kathleen was their favorite character in the book because she was like a strong African mother raising children in the township. They thought she was wonderful, So it was just this sort of be loyal to your characters, be loyal to your, be loyal to the story, be loyal to the subject. It possesses its own integrity.
One of the things we talk about in journalism is that when you're writing about something complicated, you want to get simple. You want to use simple language. You want to use simple sentences. And I've seen you interviewed where you talk about, because a lot of Tinkers is fairly abstract. I mean, it's very sort of modernist Virginia Woolf, things happening in George and Howard's heads. You talk about writing in concrete nouns and verbs. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so for when you're writing fiction, one of the main virtues of fiction is that it be imminent. It's about imminent things. It's about action. It's about things happening in this world. And one of the practical problems with Tinkers was that most of the book is actually just a guy sort of like lying on the bed like this. And so one of the things I realized is that I was going to have to figure out a way to embody a lot of things just to keep the book anchored in the real world, just so it wouldn't lapse into purely rhetorical or theoretical language. But that specificity and precision and concrete writing is that's different than complexity. I do want to write with maximum complexity. I want to write books that accommodate the complexity of the human mind. I want to light up people's brains.
Talk about how you use language when you're doing that, and ensure that you don't lose your readers.
Again, I'm not thinking about the poor reader. To me, again, it's all mutually reinforcing. If you write, to me the greatest style is precision. The way that you don't lose a reader is you use language as precisely as possible. and you have to presume you can't. And this is funny because I taught writing a lot, and it was one of these counterintuitive things where writers would make things shorter and they would make them more simple because they'd say, oh, I don't want to take up too much of the reader's time. Well, it's like, that's your job as a writer. You're supposed to take up the reader's time. So you presume somebody who wants complicated, beautiful, intricate, thoughtful, precise writing, and so you presume. You presume that readers are reading your book rather than people who don't want to read your book.
As we heard in some of those excerpts, you have a just marvelous brain for detail, and you write these lyrical paragraphs that are jam-packed with very precise details. I have a friend who loved tinkers who said this guy has more ways of describing wind moving through trees than a botanist. Are you?
That's nice compliment.
Are you out there writing down details as you see them? Are you walking through the woods taking notes, or is that all just the imagination at play?
I guess I kind of am. I mean, I'm so like the landscape of particularly the New England landscape. Particularly, I spend tons of time up on the North Shore, just wandering around the Audubon sanctuaries. I actually just bought a house that's like sort of smack dab in the middle of near the Ipswich River Sanctuary, so I could be closer to the the birch bark and the creek water with the sunlight in it. But part of it is, it's. I mean, part of being a good writer too is just developing the muscles of, developing the muscles that have to do with being able to pay attention and being able to sustain attention. It's the quality of attention and being able to sustain the closest possible attention for the longest amount of time that you can, so that when you climb down into your world, and you just sort of sit there and you sit very quietly and you watch and you listen and you smell and you just take down all the details. It's imagining things as elaborately as you possibly can. And in my case, what I'm just interested in is I'm interested in the people. I'm interested in the experience of being, as it were, the experience of being conscious. So I don't write about far-flung places usually. I don't write about remote times. I write about things that are sort of right at my fingertips, because I think of it as sort of the medium through which I can sort of through which and into which I can precipitate the characters. So whenever I write about landscape, and if I can write about wind of 50 million different ways, it's not because I'm ever writing about wind per se. It's always because I'm writing about a character's experience of the wind. So it's always being character is always being refracted through description. What was the question?
I think we got it. No, I think we got. It's very much like Tinkers. We got there.
Yeah,
we went this way, but we got there. A lot of beginning fiction instruction, like a lot of long form narrative instruction that we talk about here, is all about scenes upon scenes upon scenes. What would you say to a student who, in one of your classes, who said, so I'm going to write this novel, and it's sort of this family story, and I'm going to change point of view multiple times, and I'm going to change tense multiple times, and I'm just going to play with chronology, and I'm not going to outline, and I'm just going to take all these pieces of paper and staple them together. What would you?
So God help you. It's. I mean, this all sorts of different, very, very, germane issues to writing there. One of them is that, when you're teaching writing, particularly fiction writing, one of the great temptations that as a teacher you have to resist, and as a student you also have to resist the influence of, is to present your process as normative. People have been to grad school, right? So much of grad school is just like you just learn to be like your professor. Kind of, like there's no independent thinking. You inherit this, datum. And so so for example, one of my mentors was Marilyn Robinson, and she has to write her books from the very first sentence of the very first chapter, and she has to write the book from start to finish. And if she screws up anywhere along the way, she throws out the whole novel and starts again. And if I had taken that as the way that you have to write a novel, I'd just be, I'd be a plumber right now. It would have just never, so you have to kind of, you have to, because the best writing comes from you consulting your own experience, not consulting on outside authorities. So a lot of what I, tried to do as a teacher was to get students to cultivate their own intellectual and aesthetic autonomy, so that nobody could tell them whether what they were doing was right or wrong. I mean, within reason, you have to edit, and you have to, things have to be, sort of like, they have to have logic and adhere to that, be consistent with themselves. But, you don't have to say, here, Daddy, is this art? You know that it's art, and you know why. It also has to do with reading as widely and as deeply as possible. You know, you can only be, your writing can, as a fiction writer anyways, your writing can only be as good as the best stuff you've read. So yeah, and then the other thing too is I think one of the temptations with teaching writing is because writing is tough and it's wild and it's feral and it's dangerous and you know all this sort of dramatic thing, and the temptation is always to tame it and to domesticate it so that it will be easy to teach. So you chop it all up and like, today we're going to talk about character, and today we're going to talk about point of view, and here's the third person, and here's the omniscient, and here's the tense and everything. And really, those are just tools, you know. When I think of them almost like as a cinematographer would, you know. So first person present tense is the most intimate tense. It's right, you know. There's I put the reader right there, and it's just utter subjective immersion. And third person omniscient is just the wide, you know, the most comprehensive. And as I'm showing my reader the subjects and the landscapes and the descriptions, I want to be able to just move from present tense to past tense to first person to second person to third person in order to just as fully as possible model whatever it is that's at hand.
And some of that is knowing the rules so you can break the rules.
Well, absolutely, you have to. One of the best piece of advice that I ever got, I've told this before, but the best piece of advice I ever got was it was as I was leaving the last conference I had with Marilyn Robinson at the end of my 2 years at Iowa, and I was, you know, I felt like I had the, you know, the tiara and the roses, like now I've graduated from the iRise workshop. I was leaving her office, and I about to close the door behind myself, and she called out. She said, "Oh, Paul, one more thing." And I turned around. I said, "Yes, Marilyn." She said, "You really should learn how to write grammatically correct English." You know, I was like, grammar, schmammer, you know, and it really was the best. I mean, precisely because you need to know how to modulate and move around that way. Another reason that Tinkers does that is because it's largely interior. You know, I'm not interested in plot. God bless plot. I love to read books with plot, but I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in character. Plot emerges out of character. I'm just interested in consciousness and the experience. And so I don't know how far this metaphor works, but you know, you have these personal metaphors or analogies that you use as a writer to get you through your day. I think of plot as Newtonian physics. It's mechanical. Every effect B has to have a cause A, and so you have to have this sort of like every gear has, like with the clocks, everything has to. But I think of the mind, once you get into a character's mind and its interior, I think of the mind as quantum, which is like it's supraluminary. You know, it just moves instantly. You know, it's instantaneous influence or whatever it's called in quantum physics, because that's how consciousness works. And so a book like Tinkers can be tougher to sort of catch the wave on, as it were, because it doesn't work mechanically, it doesn't work plot wise, but then there is a character logical logic to it.
Well, I mean, I might argue, and it's your book, so feel free to disagree.
No, I'm happy to hear what you think.
You don't care about the reader, so.
You're right. So you're not here.
But I might argue that the plot of Tinkers is actually it's pretty simple and straightforward.
No,
it's everything else.
Well, right. Yeah.
That informs the plot that's important.
Yeah, and I mean, I just started with a very, very simple. What I find compelling are just those circumstances in which people find themselves that are actually impossible. Suddenly, what you find is impossible is the case in your life. And so the very first thing I wrote in Tinkers was there's a scene where Howard, the tinker, has just suddenly becomes conscious of the fact that instead of turning into his driveway or wherever his house is, he's actually gone past his house, and he realizes that means that he is leaving his family. And it was just the first, I just remember just the first day of writing it, just thinking like the reason he had to do that was because if he had been deliberate, if he had allowed himself to be conscious of it, it would have been impossible, because it would just be too terrible to leave your family. So I set up this kind of double consciousness for him. And the reason why I wrote about, in the second book, it's about a father losing his only child, because that seems to me impossible. I just can't, and I know people who have suffered losses like that, and I see them survive and stay beautiful, kind, generous, merciful, loving people, and I just do not know how they could do it. And so, when I write, I don't want to write about anything in which anything less than everything is at stake. Why bother making art? If it's again, what were we talking about? God, I can't do this. See, I've just come out of this, just like, like this pressure cooker, like, finish the novel.
One more question, and then we'll throw it to the crowd.
Sure, yeah.
Is the process on Enon any different than the process on Tinkers for you?
Well, it was very fascinating because, with all the stuff that happened with Tinkers, I had, this perfect record of non-publication and perfect obscurity with Tinkers. So I was able to work on it for 10 years, and so now I have written a novel that is a little bit more than twice as long as Tinkers in a little bit less than a third of the time that it took me to. So, in that way, it was just sort of interesting to just see, could I compress all that work into 3 years? Turns out I can, but that's why I'm ready to jump out of my socks right now, because it's been so intense. And it's been fascinating to watch what I did with to see sort of in retrospect what I did in Tinkers that was sort of just real process and what was sort of sheer ineptitude. And it turns out, again, I'm just not efficient at it. One of the strangest things about writing this second book was, one, just because of what happened with Tinkers and the Pulitzer and all that sort of stuff. I went from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in an instant. So I wrote most of Enon in hotel rooms and on airplanes. So that was really weird. I had to just learn how to just put the blinders on. Luckily though, that when Tinkers won the Pulitzer, I had already sold Enon to Random House based on the first 50 pages of it. So I knew that Random House didn't just love me for my Pulitzer. And it turns out that the editor who bought Enon bought it without having read Tinkers. So that was just what I've been holding on to, the fact that this book has its own integrity. And because of what happened with Tinkers' first novel and all this sort of stuff, everybody's, it's just like, oh God, the second book by definition has to suck, right? Because it's just the way, so no pressure. But it
doesn't suck, right?
I hope not. Who knows? Unfortunately, what I'm learning too is it's not my job to like my own books. It's my job to just be like, you got to be better. So because of this worldly phenomenon that occurred with Tinkers exerts a huge gravitational pull. And so what I had to keep doing is, whenever I was stuck with Enon, I had to resist the temptation to sort of drift over into Tinkers and use what worked for Tinkers and import it back into Enon. Enon had to have its own critical mass, its own center of gravity, its own integrity. And sometimes that was what came out on the page looked to me radically different than Tinkers, so I second guessed myself. Like, for example, there's people talk in Enon. Like, there's dialogue in Enon, and there's quotation marks. And I thought, I don't have dialogue. I don't use quotation marks. But it's one of those things where you have to submit yourself to the work. You can't impose your will on the subject. The best writers and the best writing is you sort of you submit yourself to your subject and let it elaborate itself, and you just you take dictation, as I said.
Part of what's so unique about Tinkers is so much of it does feel sort of experimental and almost like a jazz riff.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that being a benefit of 10 years to work on something. Does the truncated time frame and the fact that you're writing it for Random House change any of that? Does it put any additional pressure on you to not worry about readers?
No, the editor I've been working with at Random House is just absolutely wonderful. She bought the book something like 3 years ago. I kind of lost chronology, but 2 or 3 years ago she bought it. And then the minute I went and I had lunch with her, and sort of we convinced each other that we were right for each other, that sort of thing. Sort of the editor comes to court, and once we decided to do the book together, I didn't hear from her for 3 years. She just left me alone, and my agent would once in a while sort of say, how's it going? And I'd say, fine, it's going all right. And I'd redouble my efforts, but she was just wonderful. She just laid off, and then I just presented her the book 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she just said, great, there's maybe 10 or 15 pages of stuff that I want to do that has to do, it's interesting, as an aside, this book, Enon is written in first person, and so there's some, as opposed to Tinkers, which kind of goes all over the place, and there are just some inherent difficulties with first person. Actually, like the rest of the real world can go away when you're in just one character's mind. So there's a little bit of I just have to do some sort of objective world stuff, 10 or 15 pages of that. So
let's throw it up into the crowd.
Yeah, let's just hear.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Right, two interlinked questions.
Mm-hmm.
First one, how many rejection slips did you collect for Tinkers?
Yeah.
How did you sell it to agents and publishers? Because they always insist on plot.
Yeah, that's and they're interconnected. I don't know how many rejections I got for Tinkers, 2 or 3 dozen maybe. I mean, one of the funny things was that just in these rejection letters, I mean, most of them were just thanks but no thanks, but some of them were sort of these lectures about nobody wants to read a plotless novel that's slow and about an old guy dying, and I rejected the rejections. What am I going to do? Put a car chase in for you? You know what I mean? Like I write birch bark metaphysics. If you don't like it, you should not be reading. Go read Tom Clancy. I mean, love Tom. I don't love Tom Clancy, but well, whatever. I'm going to get myself in trouble. But it was just it was non-negotiable, and it wasn't because I'm a particularly bullheaded person. I just knew where the integrity of the book, lay, and just. I couldn't make the book any different than it was. And again, so I did. I mean, one of the things that I had to reckon with when Tinkers had got all those rejections was that I might well be a writer who never published, or Tinkers might well be a book that was never published because I couldn't just super add a plot. It just wouldn't work. It would betray. It would become a fraudulent work. So I just, but in a way that was also liberating too, because then I just realized I can write whatever I want. It's like that's what happened with William Faulkner. The Sound and the Fury. They wouldn't publish his 3rd novel or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but in the process of realizing that he thought he would never get published, his reaction was he wrote The Sound and the Fury. So I just think it's one of those things that you just have to have faith in your own vision and God bless editors, particularly and commercial editors, but they have a bottom line, and that bottom line puts pressure on known quantities, and they see so many manuscripts that it's not that they don't want to, it's that it's maybe necessarily they can't take a risk in some ways. They've got to answer to the bottom line, and also they see so much material that sometimes the subtleties of stuff can get lost, and if it doesn't look like something you've already seen before that works, I think it can get lost. I don't know. I could never be an editor precisely for that reason. If I have to read 50 student manuscripts or whatever in a short period of time, it just all blurs to me, and I just sort of lose the ability to distinguish. I mean, I'd be afraid that I'd do somebody wrong because I would miss the subtlety. But as a writer, I just can't. I can't worry about that. And so it's interesting because Enon does have a little bit more plot to it. But through no fault of my own.
Yes, right here.
Maybe this doesn't happen to you, but if it does, if you find yourself, you've written some stuff on a page and it's there and it's sort of okay, but it doesn't have that spark, or it doesn't go deep enough, or it's just flat or something, what do you do?
You just push on it and push on it and push on it until you either break through into what's really true underneath all your own bad prose, or until it just breaks and you throw it out. It just has to do with just applying the greatest amount of kind of aesthetic. I think of it as aesthetic pressure on the material. You just have to get the language to do as much as possible. I always write from character, again, from the inside out, from the character outwards too. So I have a whole sort of drop-down menu of just sort of like, am I telling myself the truth? Is the character telling me the truth? I sort of interrogate the character. Sometimes what I do too is if I'm sort of sitting there with the character and I'm saying, oh my God, I'm so sick of this character. It just sounds like he's whining all the time. What a pain in the ass he is. What I do is I take one step back from that and I bracket my irritation with my character and I give it to the character. And I just say, Sam was suddenly disgusted with himself because he felt like all he did was sit around and whine like a baby. You take it as your problem, not me. And then all of a sudden, and then often what another thing that I do, that it's the craziest thing, but if I'm getting closer and closer to thinking that maybe the great fundamental principle of composition in almost any art too is, or one of the fundamentals is contrast. In music, it's counterpoint. In painting, it's like when you have a still life painting, the foreground is dark and the background is bright, and so it pulls things into relief. So a lot of times what I do is if if I suddenly find like things are kind of going dead, they're limp on the page. What I do is I just take whatever it is I'm writing about, and the next sentence is the absolute antithesis of whatever I've just been. Whatever the momentum is. If it's a dark and stormy night, suddenly it's sunny. I mean that's kind of an oversimplified version, but it's just turn things around because usually, if something's flat, it's because it's one-dimensional. If it's one-dimensional, it's because you're only writing about one part of the truth. And usually the truth consists of apparently contradictory things being the case at the same time. If that makes sense. Ambivalence.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you say that you write on airplanes in hotel rooms, and I'm wondering, do you have any rituals or do you have any particular techniques that get you into that writing frame?
No, I think it's just practice. I'm practiced at it. When I was writing Tinkers, when I was writing Tinkers, I was teaching full time as a preceptor here, teaching part time in the extension school every semester during the summer, with my wife raising 2 sons at the time who were both under 5 years old, and in my spare time I wrote fiction. So it was just I couldn't sit around and say, oh, the muse didn't show up today. It was just like, you got 15 minutes, flip that friggin' laptop open and start typing. So it's just that sort of, and then I just now it's all like so that was that just happened because I wanted to write a novel, and now it just kind of happens because now my productivity is interlinked or is implicated with a lot of other people. You know what I mean? There's sort of publishers and agents and all these sort of things. And what I want to do is I just want to preclude this kind of worldly catastrophe where I have people sending me emails and so like I just sort of, it's like scared straight, just like you just write it before somebody makes you write it kind of thing, because I am by nature lazy, all writers say that, but it's sort of true. I'd rather, if I could, in some ways, like my ideal life is just reading. I would just like to just read books, I've written many more thousands of pages of marginalia than I'll ever write published fiction. I just like to read books and just write back to them. Oh, isn't that interesting? Aren't you funny? That sort of, and just take naps.
The writing life is so glamorous. Questions?
I'm really interested in, you seem like you have a real fluid kind of concept of time.
Oh, yeah.
And I noticed, that's obviously in Tinkers with all the books and how you just sort of telescope back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like the 3 different stars in the one you just read from Africa from 3 different times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I felt like Enon kind of.
Oh, yeah.
back to
Yeah.
Salem. But, are you just, I'm just curious about that. Like, do you have a wide grasp of history or is your brain is it more the consciousness?
It's consciousness.
Kind of thing?
It's perception. I'm just fascinated by it. I'm sort of fascinated by. I don't know any of the math or whatever of physics, but I'm fascinated with the philosophy of physics. And I probably know my Kant just well enough to get it all wrong, but the wrong version I have of it is kind of interesting for writing fiction. Like just the idea that sort of time and space are functions of the physiology of the human brain. That's kind of interesting. The idea that time per se, might be nothing like what we experience it as. And just that it accelerates and decelerates and dilates and contracts and all that sort of stuff. And it's fascinating because it's all consciousness. Consciousness is the great mystery. It's just crazy that we're all sitting here right now, conscious and talking to each other. It's just, you have to like get up and have breakfast and write your article or whatever. But like if the second you stop and you think about all of this, it's astonishing. So fiction writing, for me, anyways, is a good way to spend my life. Just like I get to wake up every day and spend the whole day thinking about how astonishing it all is. Yeah.
Paul, I just want to say it's such a pleasure to hear you speak about writing.
Oh, thank you kindly. I just feel like he's going on and
Him
again.
Right, and there it is. I feel like your writing process is you're constantly in conversation in your mind, and when you and with the world, like your marginalia, and then you catch that ride. When you start writing, you just join that, you catch that.
Yeah.
that stream.
Yeah, and it is that, it's just that sort of just being mindful, as it were. Yeah, I mean, and also sort of, and then sort of socially or whatever, I mean, I think I have this great democratic impulse. I mean, I just think that, like the imagination is the greatest tool for, is as good a tool as an electron microscope for accessing the deepest meanings that are available to people. I worry about this idea that like you can't, you cannot consult your own experience is no longer an authentic datum for consulting reality. It's just like what, how do we end up believing that? That's so it's just that idea that like if you have a brain, a reasonably working brain, and sort of a little bit of patience, you have access to the universe. Does that make sense? I hope that sounds good.
I'm curious that as a musician, hearing you talk, I'm a music fanatic, so this came to mind.
Mhm.
It seems that you must love jazz.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So I'm just curious, what kind of music you listen to and what connected you.
I listened to all sorts. I mean, I used to, the band that I was in was just like, power hard rock trio. I played lead drums, and it was, just terrible. But yeah, I mean, I listened to classical music. I listened to chamber music. I just sort of listen. I just have Beethoven and Mozart's piano sonatas and string quartets, small stuff, just on kind of like a continual loop, and tons of jazz, Coltrane, and all that sort of stuff. And it's just fascinating to me that these beautiful paradoxes that don't. That if you're a fiction writer, an artist, these paradoxes you don't want to solve them. You love the So I love the fact that with John Coltrane, you listen to him, and at a certain point, it just becomes incidental that what he's playing is a saxophone is coming through a saxophone. It could be drums, it could be paint, it could be, and yet at the same time, the medium is absolutely essential to the expression. So it's this beautiful kind of. I don't want to reconcile those things. The human experience is fraught with those kind of apparent contradictions, and that's one of the nice things is that, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not trying to reconcile contradiction. I'm trying to actually sort of complicate it, because that's so much of our experience is that kind of ambiguous experience, feeling two things at once, utterly and believing two things at the same time. I have to tell people I'm a terrible Protestant and I'm a terrible atheist. God is dead and he's mad at me for thinking so. You know what I mean?
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I have a question. I'd like to refer back to the moment when you were reading to us and you stopped and kind of edited out loud. Oh my God, that sounds like John Irving. And I'm wondering if that was a reference to John Irving or if that was sort of a comment on, derivative writing and sort of how you think about what you're reading and the influences on you and in your work.
Yeah, I think that's it's a subject I'd love to contemplate, because as a reader, I mean, I feel like all my writing is a response to reading. So I feel like I'm in dialogue and conversation with my favorite writers. And as such, I'm delighted. I have no anxiety about influence. I am delighted to wear my influences on my sleeve. Tinkers, there's just no doubt. I mean, look at Tinkers and no, I never read any Emerson. You know what I mean? Like, no, of course, I'd be delighted. Emerson and Wallace Stevens with all the weather and the climatology of consciousness and the imagination, all that sort of stuff. But so then the criteria for, like, say, that line there is, it always kind of struck me as like a little bit flat. Like I felt like I'd heard it before and I wasn't doing anything to it. And so now just thinking that it was John Irving, it's sort of, that was just imitative or unconsciously derivative, so it goes. As opposed to it's something that's an amplification on or an addition to, ideas that I've seen and loved and repeatedly go back to in one of Wallace Stevens' poems or something like that. So it's just that idea of contributing to a dialogue rather than just parroting high sentiment.
Just to go back to music for a second, Paul, you mentioned that you're interested in character, not plot, and I'm thinking about instruments. Couldn't one say that if you're really choosing character, you might have been a violinist, but you chose the drums, which is really all about plot.
Why?
Well, because it's it's keeping time, it's getting everybody where they're supposed to go.
I guess that's true. I mean, one of the things of being a drummer that's interesting is you keep time, but that I'm obsessed with time, right? And so one of the things about drums, I won't do a clinic here, but one of the things that's interesting is, any given song is in a particular. I mean, unless it's free jazz when but like if a song is in like say 4/4 time, you can play 7/4 time over it and show up back on the 1 every 4. There's all sorts of ways that you can have time, double time, expand on it. My favorite drummer of all time is Elvin Jones, who's John Coltrane's drummer. Used to see him at the Regatta Bar. Every time he'd come, we'd just see him just like from Wednesday through Sunday, and we'd sit next to him. We could, and you just watch. And one of the things that he could do is, the band would be burning along, and he would take a solo, and he played. And I was a good enough drummer not to ever play what he played, but I could keep time. Like I'd be going along with the song, and then the second he'd go into his solo, I could keep the time of the song while he went off into deep space, and no matter, and then he would be playing things that I just could not even understand. As a drummer, I just knew I was a good enough drummer to understand that he was doing stuff that I could never imagine. And then every time he'd come back in right on the 1, perfect tempo, perfect time, so he could just go out into the cosmos and do whatever he wanted to, and then fetch it all back into right here, right now. And there's just something just so profound and beautiful about that, So that's the way he'd unspool time and then gather it right back up. Just absolutely wonderful. I don't know what that has to do with plot, but it's
More.
Hi, I was curious to hear a little bit more about your experience as a student of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a lot about the books that have influenced you and learning to write from what you read. But I'm also curious because you went to the Iowa Writers Conference, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that experience, what
Sure.
you learned, and also about your relationship with Marilyn Robinson.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I was in the band. We were on a break from touring and recording that turned out to be permanent. But I had a little bit of time, and had always, I think, like a lot of writers, had thought of myself as a writer for at least 10 years before I ever wrote anything. I was like, yes, of course I'm a writer, because I have, again, high sentiment. The dangers of high sentiment. But I had some time off during a summer, and so I figured, I'll try to write a story. And the reason why I decided to write a story was because, like a lot of readers, I wanted to answer back. I just loved the books I loved so much that I wanted. And at the time, I was smitten with a lot of the so-called magical realists, Carlos Fuentes and Julio Cortázar and Marquez and all those guys. So I wrote an absolutely terrible short story. I mean, so embarrassingly bad. It makes me burst into tears right now thinking about it. And signed up for a course at Skidmore College summer. Their summer writers institute that they do there. And just by the luck of the draw, Marilyn Robinson walked in as my teacher. And it was just an instance of within 10 minutes of her walking into the room, I just said, that's the life I want from my own brain. The aesthetic, intellectual, spiritual, everything, the sophistication, the level at which she conducts and engages her consciousness. I just said, that's it. That's what I want. Talk about going from high to low, going from being a rock drummer to. But
How old were you then?
I was 30. I up until I was 30, I basically lived in the back of a van and traveled around Europe and North America. So my poor wife, when I told her I'm giving up the drums, I'm going to become a writer of literary fiction. the poor woman. Then the joke used to be, well, the writing thing's not working out, I'm going to become a dancer. I was really meant to be the body for it. It's always been actually my calling. So anyways, but I decided I wanted to go and study with her, and so just through dumb luck, I wrote. The first story I threw out, then I wrote the second. Tinkers was the third story I ever tried to write. And it wasn't, and then it's not saying anything. The rough short story version of it was sort of pitiful. But I wrote a second and a third story, submitted it, and Frank Conroy, who was the director of the Writers' Workshop at the time, God bless, he saw something in it. I don't know what it was, because I had never written before. I think to this day I attribute to the fact that I read so widely and deeply, and that I'd read all the best stuff I could possibly get my hands on, with Proust and Thomas Mann and Henry James and Edith Wharton, and Virginia Woolf and all that sort of stuff. so I just think that kind of out of the gate, I was able to make noises that sounded like they could possibly someday be stories, and that maybe I should be embedded. But then when I went to the writer's workshop, like a week after I found out I had been admitted, I found out that Marilyn Robinson had got this thing called the Strauss Living Award, which is like one of the MacArthur grants. So she wasn't going to be there the 2 years I was there. Luckily, a wonderful English novelist named Barry Unsworth was there. Spent a year studying with him. And then another one of my teachers was Elizabeth McCracken. Just absolutely the most mind-bogglingly wonderful teacher could ever wish for. And then Marilyn if she's left her own, she'll end up just being very solitary. And so what happened is she realized that she said, I was going for weeks at a time where the only other living creature I spoke to was my dog. So she gave back this living award. And so I had her for one semester. It was my last semester of the second year. My tank was empty. I just submitted stuff that she just sort of, well, I suppose someday this might, it was a very humbling experience. I don't know, it's hard to say what I learned there. I mean, when I was there, I worked on a novel that on the day I left, I threw out because talk about plot, it was a novel about a 12-year-old girl who disguises herself as a boy so that she can work in a silver mine in 16th century colonial Mexico. And so it was one of those books where I couldn't, I had to, every sentence that I wanted to write, I had to do a month's worth of research. I was like, I don't know if the cantilever would be by the, and would the, pre-Columbian person think that the German engineer, so it was a disaster. So in my case, I learned how not to write. I worked for 2 years on the novel that taught me how not to write novels. But I'm a firm believer that, there's this weird, I just hate this, it's a silly debate, can writing be taught? It's just, nobody ever asked that about dancing or acting or painting. Of course, you go to Yale and you go to Yale and you study acting. Like, writing is a fine art. I mean, nobody can give you your vision, but people writing is a very technically difficult endeavor. And there's all sorts of types of discipline that you can have somebody model for you. So that you can learn how to do it for yourself.
Do you read your work out loud to test the rhythm?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the if you want to cut to the chase, read your work out loud. If you really have nerves of steel, have somebody read it to you. I especially do that though because again back to kind of the drumming, that sort of thing. I mean, I write very intuitively and very much in terms of rhythm, and I often know what the time signature is or how many beats are in a sentence before I know what it literally means, and then I just keep layering over and over and over, and so I have to read it out loud to make sure that it has the right number of beats in it. And I think of Enon's a little bit different, or parts. It's just funny because it's sort of one of the things you have to learn is that it's not like, oh, isn't the subject I've chosen to write about so lucky that I'm gonna like throw my style on top of it. You have to have a flexible style because if you have a trash-talking, low-life house painter, to name one minor character in Enon, you can't have him be, oh, forsooth, the birches and metaphysics. He's got to say, motherfucker. He's just got to hit. So it's more just like, you have to kind of know how to do it all. But in Tinkers, for example, I mean, I just think of Tinkers as it's lyric poetry. It is unlineated lyric poetry, and so it happened to work that way. It was meditative, so it just kind of was all very quiet and unruffled in some ways, and so it worked that way. That was one of the shocking things about writing Enon when these other characters came in and just started sort of strong-arming the stuff. I thought, I don't know how to write dialogue, and it was this interesting experience of. It's not like you learn in a writing class how to write dialogue and then you put dialogue into your story to make the story better. It's a character starts speaking clearly because he has something to say, and you just write down what he says, and lo and behold, you know how to write dialogue. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but it's just that sort of if the character has something to say, they'll say it, and you'll write it down attentively. And so there's that's precision and detail and listening to how the character actually speaks, getting out of the way.
Are you reading out loud as you write, or
No,
you
no,
write,
no.
write a chunk and then read
No.
and then?
And I write by the sentence, and I write from within inside a sentence, and I just keep generating and generating and generating and generating, and it's kind of harrowing, you know. I just sort of just like hold on for dear life and let, you know, see kind of where the sentence starts and where it takes me.
And who do you trust enough to let them read it out loud to you?
I don't. I don't. I mean, you can do that. It's not for me. That's not for me. What's it? Other than the fact that I'd have to show my agent I had to show some stuff to periodically for Enon. I didn't show anybody anything from Tinkers except for the workshop version of the short story of it. The whole time I worked on it, I just worked on it for 5 years and didn't show anybody. And Enon, my wife has read little bits of it, and my agent had to read little bits of it just to believe me that I was actually writing it. But I don't have any readers. I don't show it to other people.
And are you line editing throughout the process, or do you wait?
I revise endlessly. I mean, I don't even know how many drafts. Like every sentence has been written 25 times. It's just, I think of it as painting. One of my kind of is just, I mix metaphors outrageously, but I think of it as painting because I put a layer of paint on, I scrape it off, I put it on, I take it off, and then what is it called? Pentimenti, in painting, where you end up with like a narrative that's so deep that you can see other things that were originally up underneath the narrative, and they help thicken the writing. And I just think of the book as almost like a canvas that's in the back room, and I'm just working on it for years and years and years and years, and then finally kind of there it is. But yeah, just endless revision. When I read Tinkers out loud now, this copy of Tinkers is this is the one that I've taken all around the world. I actually have every little reading I've done. I've written it down. Look, Harvard Writers at Work, 4.4. Presumptuous. What if I died on my way? But my version of like all the stuff that I read out loud is just like I edit while I do reading. It's just if they let me do it, I'd rewrite the whole book. I'm very idealistic in that way, or formalist in that way. I feel like somewhere in the universe is the perfect version of the novel, and I just sort of, they put me on a tether, and I go out there, and I sort of bring it back as best as I can, and try to put it back into language while it's there, pure and pristine, spinning, and I could go back out there again. They won't let me come back.
We have time for 2 more questions. So
how do you know when you finish?
I don't know. Well, they sort of have to, tear it out of my hands in a way. There's deadlines and all that sort of stuff. But then there's also, because I write in this very non-linear way, it's just strange. I just keep piling it up and piling it up and piling it up. And just in both cases now, there's just been a particular scene where I finish the scene and I just realize, that's it, I'm done. I've told the story. Now, like in both cases, the editor says, the reader, hello, there's a couple of things we actually need you to explain to, and I go back and sort of, put that in because I don't want to. I'm not churlish, but I kind of know when the whole story is there, when the whole, everything's been said that needs to be said.
is that scene the last scene in the novel, or is that scene somewhere?
Sometimes it's not. Yeah, sometimes I have to tape it in. That with Enon, there were like 3 or 4 scenes that I kept. That I knew were the last 3 or 4 scenes, but I wasn't quite sure which one was the last, which one was the ultimate, which one was the anti-penultimate, which was the anti-penultimate. And I just had to just keep stirring the pot, and then finally they kind of they all sort of fell into place, and I got the last line, and I said, oh, that's it, that's a good last line, just keep it keep it.
Does Harry Potter, Peter Rowling, have any influence on you?
None. Just it's past my if anything it would have been Tolkien, in my case, but yeah, I've read some of the Harry Potter stuff to my kids, but just for whatever reason Harry Potter just does not lay any claim whatsoever to my imagination or my interest. This is dangerous. Don't start, because you don't like Harry Potter. I'll never read that crap.
Tom Clancy and J.K. Rowling.
I know, God, who else have I badmouthed? I'll start talking. No, I won't.
Okay, one more.
I'm curious if, being a relentless reviser, if when you reread Tinkers now, or when you read any of your old stuff, do you still feel like it's finished, or do you still have the urge to kind of fix a word here?
I had the continual urge to fix words. Yeah, and I mean there is always that danger of over revising, and as a concept, having worked on Tinkers for 10 years or whatever the total was, and having never showed it to anybody, I really did very constantly worry that I was overdoing it and that the prose was going to be so screwed down that it would be inscrutable, So then when people started reading it and saying, "Oh, it makes sense," I thought, "Really? I meant for it to make sense." I wanted to. I don't want to be obscure. I want it to be so clear it doesn't even feel like you're reading language. I want it to be so precise it feels like it's just going straight into your brain as experience. And that's the criteria, is just making it so perfect that it doesn't even feel like it's written on the page, So you can always do it better, because language is kind of an imperfect tool, But that's what's so nice about it in some ways. I find that reassuring that you'll never achieve perfection, but you always kind of strive for it. It's another one of those paradoxes that I kind of am perfectly comfortable with. I like that. It's comforting.
Can you close us out? Tell us the story of how you found out you won the Pulitzer.
How I found out I won the Pulitzer. Oh, well, they don't tell you you've won. So I was teaching at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I was without my family, because interestingly enough, what had happened with Tinkers is just it had a good it did well before the Pulitzer. It did respectably, but I was absolutely flat broke that the winter before Tinkers won the Pulitzer. And I had been unemployed, and I'd been on unemployment, and it ran out. And my old 1991 Cutlass Sierra station wagon was held together with duct tape and all this sort of. And the babies were starving, all this. Sorry, don't stop me. Here we go. Poor me. But anyways, things were pretty dire. So Iowa invited me out to teach. So I left my my family behind here because it was the middle of the year. Couldn't take the kids out of school. And so I was living in this really crappy grad student apartment. I was like, how did I end up back here? It was actually in between two sororities, so like every Saturday night, serenaded by the retching of the sisters of Delta, out, screaming over boys and stuff. It was crazy. And it was just a Monday afternoon, and I knew that they were going to announce the Pulitzer. They were going to post it on their website at 3 p.m. because we're writers, it's my business kind of. And I was going to teach a seminar at 4, so I figured, I'll log on, I'll see who won. I'm sure I'll recognize the name of who won. I might even know who won, right? Because this is my milieu. And I'll find out who it was, and then I'll just go to class and we'll talk about it for the first 10 minutes of class. And I've told this story many times before, but it really was this, it was 2:59 or whatever, so I was just sort of hitting refresh, and who was it that won the year before? Oh, it was Olive Kittredge, so it was Elizabeth Strauss. And it just kept saying Elizabeth Strout, Elizabeth Strout, Elizabeth Strout, Paul Harding, and I went, no, wait a minute, how when you do that, you get the margin of the other window, and like the other document comes up. I was like, no, not Paul Harding Tinkers, so I refreshed it, Paul Harding, and then it just hit me, and it was one of those moments where in the movies where they do the thing where they I don't know what they do with the lens, and suddenly everything looks like it's going forward and backward. And it was just one of those times where, I've said it before, but like the facts outstripped my ability to comprehend them. It was just because it was suddenly, I was a completely different person. I was Pulitzer Prize winning author Paul Harding. While I'm sitting there like, I gotta go teach, I can't, Henry James, and it was just like, you just see what your life was, just like you have no time to sort of get ready to be who you are, or have your life be what it is rather than what it was. It was just instantaneous. And I actually did. I sort of like half fainted. I sort of just kind of toppled off of the couch and was, looking up at the crummy, cracked ceiling. And 90 seconds later, the AP was on the phone, saying, "How does it feel?" And like, that's how it feels, And then that basically started what turned out to be close to 20 straight months of book touring, and because it really one thing one doesn't contemplate when one contemplates one's Pulitzer is anticipating one's Pulitzer is all the foreign rights to the book, all the translators, so it was immediately translated, and and so then I got to go all around the world and do events for that. So and then I finally had to come off the road to finish Enon, and so now it's strange because I had the experience. I finished Enon, and I was like worried that the editor was going to say we've got big problems here or whatever, and she sent me the nicest email. We had the nicest phone conversation, and she just said, "This is, fasten your seatbelts because we're going to really go, we're going to go great guns on this." And the only thing I could think of was like, good, I dodged that bullet, but boy, the third book's going to suck. I just like no rest for the wicked, so.
We'll bring you back then and talk
I
about
was
that.
gonna say, we'll see if I'm, sort of still, yeah. Great, I'd be glad to come back.
Paul Harding, thank you.
Oh, thank you all. Great pleasure. Thank you.